Welcome to Excel magic trick number 1553. Hey, in this video, we got to talk about how to create a running total in a column. And we want to see how to do it with a worksheet formula, Power Query M code, and a DAX formula. Now, this question comes from Gert at YouTube. Here's our proper data set. And as we can see in an Excel sheet, we can sort the dates. Here's the units, and we have two separate goals. How do we do just a running total? Well, that's just adding as we go. So 120 plus 50 is 170. 170 plus 50 is 220. But that's for the entire time period spanning multiple years. We also want to see how to do it by month. So 120 all the way to 220. But then when it hits a new month, we need to restart the running total. Also, when we get to January in the next year, we need to start, not a continuation of this month up here. So we'll see how to do it with worksheet formulas, Power Query M code, and DAX Calculated Columns. Now, below the video, you can download this file and follow along. So with worksheet formulas, a running total, if this is sorted, is going to be quick and easy. Well, we're trying to add, so we're going to use the sum function. I want to select units. Shift colon, close parentheses. Now that's a silly formula because if I copy it down, it would just be a relative cell reference. So very carefully, I click in the first C7. And when I see my cursor flashing, I hit F4 once and twice. I'm locking the 7 row reference, but not the second one. So as I copy down, that will remain 7 all the way down. But the second one will move to 8, 9, 10, and so on. That is an example of an expandable range. Control-Enter to put the formula in the cell and keep the cell selected. Click and drag to copy it down. I immediately point to the Smart tag. Click, Fill without formatting. If I go down a few rows and hit the F2 key, that is an expandable range. The 7 is locked, but the second row reference is free to move as we copy the formula down. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to change this. We don't want 240 there. I want it to start over when it gets to a new month. The way we're going to do this is we're going to use the SUMIFS function. The sum range, where we're going to use our same expandable range trick. So I click in units, shift colon. We want to lock the first 7, F4, F4. That's our sum range, comma, criteria range. We need to look through the dates, shift colon, F4 once and twice, comma. Now we have expandable ranges, so as we copy down, the formulas will only look at whatever the current row is and previous. And when we're adding for a particular month, we always have a lower and an upper limit, the first of the month and the end of the month. Well, the end of the month condition does not need to be included because we have expandable ranges. So at any point as we copy the formula down, the date in the row will be the upper limit. So all we need is one condition. We just need to say, hey, from the date column, please get all the dates greater than the first day from the previous month. So in criteria 1, we need an operator, in double quotes, greater than, end double quotes, and we need to join it to the end of the month function. Now, as I copy down, I'm always going to look at whatever the date is for the row, comma, and I need to get the end of the month. -1 says, give me the end of the month from the previous month. Close parentheses on end of the month, close parentheses on SUMIFS. And that formula will work for running total by month. Control-Enter, double-click and send it down. Point to the Smart tag, fill without formatting. And you got to be kidding me. Look at that. For April, that's the running total. There's only 1/6. And then when we get down to January for the next year, we have 50, 110, and 140. Exactly what we want. Now, when we're creating formulas in a worksheet, F2, notice what we're allowed to do. This is a formula, and inside our formula, we just use cell references to refer to either something in the current row or the whole column. That's much different than Power Query and DAX. For example, in Power Query, when we need to refer to the whole column, we'll use Table.SelectRows. And when we want the current row, we'll use Table.AddColumns. And we'll have back-to-back custom functions. When we get over to DAX, when we need to refer to the whole column, we'll use the filter function. And when we want to refer to the current row, we'll use the earlier function. All right, I'm going to click Escape. In order to create our Power Query and DAX solution, because our data comes from an Excel worksheet, our data has to be converted to an Excel table. Now, I've already converted this to a table and named it. So now we're going to bring this one Excel table into the Power Query editor. And then we're going to refer to that import and create one Power Query solution and one DAX solution. So with a single cell selected, I go up to the Data Ribbon tab, Get and Transform from Table Range. The Power Query editor opens. On the left, I'm going to expose the queries. This is our source data. We can see it here. I want to reference this twice. So right-click, Reference. I see it selected. I hit F2 to rename it. Something like Running Total Power Query. Right-click, Reference, F2. Running total DAX, and enter. Now, I already see that mistakenly I have data type date time, and that's not what I want. So I come back to the original query. I change the data type here to just date. It's going to ask me, do I want to replace? I definitely want to replace the date time, replace current. And the beautiful thing about referencing is that anything I do to this query or to the source data will be reflected in both the Power Query solution and the DAX solution. Now, I want to load all three of these as a connection only to start. So close and load to. Only create a connection. Click OK. Our three queries have been loaded. Now, over in Queries and Connection, let's double click because we're going to work on this running total for Power Query. Now, here's our two columns. And the first thing we want to do is for each row, we want to have the first of the month. So I select Date, Add Column. Over here to From Date and Time, drop down on Date, Month, and we want Start of the Month. Similar to our Excel formula where we used the last day of the previous month, this is going to be our marker for the lower limit. Now, in our next step, we're actually going to have to refer to the date in each row and also the whole table. The problem is in the next step, if we refer to the whole table, every time that formula gets copied down for each row, it's going to have to refer to the whole table. And instead of having our formula go back each time to get the table, we're going to buffer the table. That means we can use it for every single row without making a call back to get the table. And the way we can buffer this table, which, by the way, that's the name of the output for this step, that table, is we come up to the formula bar, click F of X. There's the name of the table. After the equal sign, table.buffer, open parentheses, and at the end, close parentheses, and enter. Now, down here in Applied Steps, F2, and we're going to name this Buffered Table, and enter. Now, we want to add a custom column. And we're going to learn a few things about custom columns and about custom function. So up in Add Column, Add Custom Column. The name of this new column, we'll just call it RT for Running Total. And I want to just put the number 1 just to see what happens when I use a custom column. When I click OK, we'll see the Table.AddColumn function. It's looking at the previous step. There it is. That's the name of the column. And the third argument is a custom function. Now, the word each, that is shorthand for a custom function. Now, for example, when you use each, if I wanted to do a calculation for each row in this table, after each, I'm allowed to refer to the whole column. But as I copy the formula down, the item from each row will be used. So if I say square bracket units, because I'm running a custom function using each, it will grab each one of the values and put them in this column and enter. Now, that's silly, but of course, a formula like +1, that shows us that we have the ability to grab the value from each row. You can think of this custom function and how it's going down the column and pulling out the value for each row exactly like row context when we're using a DAX calculated column. And we'll see that later in this video. Another thing we want to learn about custom functions and this each, the each makes it easy for functions like Table.AddColumns because we just type each and then the name of the column in square brackets. and that pulls out the row value. If we wanted to not use each and explicitly type out the syntax for a custom M code function, we type open parentheses and then the name of the variable, and I'm going to call this outside table, OT, close parentheses. That's the variable we're going to use inside the parentheses. Once you define the variable, you have to use the goto operator, equal, greater than, space, and then everything that comes after the goto is how we use that variable in whatever calculation. Our calculation still needs to be this, but if I hit enter, that syntax only works with each. When you actually explicitly define your variable, then for whatever the column is where you want to grab the row item, you actually have to explicitly preface it with the variable name. So when I hit enter, that will work. Now, this is more complicated than using the each and just the field name in square brackets. But because we're going to have two functions back to back, and we're going to need to distinguish variables from this outside table where the formula is attached to this table and making a calculation from each row, and then an inside table inside of Table.SelectRows where we're going to be filtering the rows, I'm going to choose to explicitly create our M code functions with variables and goto operators. Now I want a little bit more room here. Close the queries on the left and expand the formula bar. Now we're going to use the Table.SelectRows function as part of the OT custom function. Now think about this. What are we doing? Table.AddColumns, that's attached to this outside table, and it's going to make a calculation for each row. But coming next, we're going to have Table.SelectRows. And so for each row in this table, there'll be a table inside the cell that we're making actions on. All right, you ready? I'm going to highlight that and delete. Table.SelectRows, open parentheses, and we're going to use Control-C, that same table, but now there's going to be a mini table inside of each cell, comma, and Table.SelectRows, just like Table.AddColumns, is going to make a row-by-row calculation. But this will be internally inside each one of the individual cells. Comma, space, and we're going to define our second custom function. The variable name is inside table. That means we're going to be referring to the columns inside of this table. Close parentheses, go to, and I need to filter this table. So as I copy down the rows, we're in essence going to get an expandable range like we had over in the Excel worksheet. I need the inside table, the whole date column, close square bracket, and that's the entire column. So you could visualize this entire column inside Table.SelectRows, but it's coming from that table. And now I need to say how many of you are less than or equal to the actual row value from the outside table. So this is where we say outside table square bracket date, close square bracket. And now close parentheses on Table.SelectRows. Close parentheses. When we hit enter, we get a table in each row. I could select any single cell, and no way, Table.SelectRows is definitely filtering. If I go down to this row, I can see the entire filtered table. Table.AddColumns, that's iterating this entire table. Inside Table.SelectRows is iterating that buffered table. If we think back to what we did with Excel, we used an expandable range. Here you can see the first 4 dates. In Power Query, we had to use Table.AddColumns and Table.SelectRows. As we copy our formula down, we get the same exact expandable range. Now, we do not want the table. We actually want the units column, because remember, we're ultimately trying to add those units. Now I'm going to come up to the formula and backspace. That entire Table.SelectRows is a table. And in Power Query, if you have a table, you can do a two-way lookup on this table. You can actually visualize it down here. If we had the positional index operator, we could pick out the row. If we have a field access operator, we can pick out a column. And that's exactly what we want. From this table, we want the units column. Field access operator, because it's coming after a table object, when I do square brackets, units, close square bracket. That tells the table I only want this particular column. Now we want to notice something about M code. Those square brackets are called a field access operator. Because it's coming after a table, it knows to get the whole column. Right here, though, we use the same field access operator on date. But because that field access operator on date is operating in the context of Table.AddColumns, it's iterating over this buffered table. This is the whole table, so it knows to pull out the individual item for each row. Now, when we close parentheses on Table.AddColumns, this whole construction, looking up the column, will deliver a list. So when I hit Enter, there's a list. And look at that expandable range as we copy it down. Now we almost have our final result. All we need to do is add the list of numbers. So before Table.SelectRows, well, the function is called list.sum. All the aggregate functions, sum, average, min, and so on. We'll work on lists. I better spell it right. So now I come to the end, close parentheses, and when I hit Enter, that is absolutely beautiful. That whole formula, Table.AddColumns, Table.SelectRows, list.sum, and our two custom functions, OT and IT, are doing the job. Now, one last thing. We need a data type. And the fourth argument in Table.AddColumns, if we come to the end, comma, type, and we'll say number to give us a decimal data type and enter. And there's our data type. Now I'm going to come over to Applied Steps, F2. I'm going to call this RT and enter. That's the name of the step. Now I want to add our next column, running total by month. And we're going to use almost the same formula. So highlight, Control-C, escape. Come over to F of X, click. Control-V. Now this won't quite work because it's working on 3 steps up, and I want it to work on RT. Table.AddColumn needs to know to add a column to RT. So in the first argument, I type RT, and this is going to be the name of the new column, RT by month. And now inside of Table.SelectRows, we need to add a second condition. There's the first condition. Inside table right there, are you less than or equal to outside table date? So after date, the operator for an AND logical test is all lowercase and. Inside table, field access operator to get the full column, square bracket. And we're trying to look at start of the month. And start of the month as the lower limit is included. So I have to say, hey, are any of you greater than or equal to outside table, field access operator to get the individual item in each row? And I better spell this right, and case too. Close square bracket. And now when I hit Enter, there's the running total. But when it gets to April, it starts over. And also when it gets to January for 2020, it starts a new running total. Now I'm going to come over here in F2, call this running total month. Now I've already loaded this as a connection only, so I'm going to click Load, load it as a connection only. Right click. We're going to change the load location, load to. I want to load it right there. Table, existing, let's say K6, click OK. Now that's looking good, but I want to edit this. I don't want the start of the month, so I'm going to come up, double click. Watch this. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to come up to Insert, Start of the Month, and I'm noticing there's a Date Start of the Month function. And in the formula down here, I am going to have to go to the outside table. I was looking at start of the month, but now I want to look at date. So I'm going to copy that, Control-C, come down to RTM, drop down, and right here, very carefully, Control-V, and the date has to come from the outside table, so OT, and Enter. There we go. Now I can come up, delete this step, delete, and we have our result. Now, actually, these formulas will work no matter how this table is sorted. But just in case the external table gets sorted in some other direction, I want to visually see it so these dates are sorted. So I'm going to add a sort, which will end up as a step here, ascending. Now we have our finished running totals. Now we can close and load to. And so using Power Query, M code, custom function, and some built-in functions, we have a running total and a running total by month in a column. Now we want to see how to do it with DAX. Now, the source data is the same Excel table that we're going to use for our DAX solution, as was the source data that we used for the Power Query solution. Now, normally we take an Excel table and we'd use this button right here, Add to the Data Model. But I actually brought this table in once to the Power Query editor and then referenced it. And the reason why is if I use this button right here, it'll take the Excel table name, and I didn't want that. I wanted a different name over in the data model. So that's why I loaded it this way. But now we need to load this to the data model because it's connection only. So right-click, Load to. Now I check Add this to the data model. Click OK. It's loaded. Now Power Pivot, Manage Data Model. That opens the Power Pivot for Excel window. I can see our table right here. This column has date, time, number formatting. It properly imported as a date because that's the data type from Power Query. But I'm actually going to format this. This is not necessary. This is just something I like to do. And our goal is to create our running total here. So I'm going to double click the calculated column header and call this RT for running total. Now this is a calculated column, so we come up to the formula bar. Now ultimately we need to add units. So watch this. I'm going to use an aggregate DAX function, sum. Because I'm in Power Pivot, I can simply click on the column that I want to add. It puts the proper syntax, table name, and in square bracket, the field name, close parentheses. And when I hit Enter, I get the same grand overall total number all the way down. When we use an aggregate function in a calculated column, this will always happen. If we had used just the column, not in an aggregate function, then it would have pulled out, using row context, the items for each row. But now we have this aggregate function, and we actually want the ability to filter that units column. So as we copy down, we get our expandable range. That means we need to change the filter context, and the function we use to change the filter context is the calculate function. So I type the letter C. I see the calculate function highlighted in blue. I hit Tab. Calculate takes some expression, and then whatever filters we put here, that changes the filter context. So I come to the end, comma, and in filter, as the formula automatically copies down, I somehow need to get that expandable range for our running total. So just as we did over in Power Query and M code, over there we use Table.SelectRows. Well, here in DAX, the function that allows us to filter a table, the filter function. The first argument, what's the name of the table? RT DAX. I see it highlighted in blue, so I tab. Comma. This is a full table inside of each cell in the calculated column. And that table right there has columns, just like we saw a moment ago over in our M code. Well, the column in that table that I want to use to filter it is RT down arrow to date. So now I have this date column from that table, and I'm going to try and filter it. I'm going to say any of you that are less than or equal to, and whereas here we have the full column from that table, I now need to get back to the outside table and get the row date for each row as the formula copies down. If I were to select this column, it would be just like this one, the full column referring to this filter table. But the way I jump back, and in DAX we talk about iterating in the filter function over this table, but now I need to jump back past this iterating and get back to the iterating over the outside table. And the function we use to jump to the outside table and iterate over that table is earlier. Now I come to the end, close parentheses, and enter. And there we go. We get our grand overall running total. That is the upper limit, right? So as we copy down, right under 360, the date column is looking at 4/13/19 and taking everything equal to or less than. And then because the filter table, in the filter argument here, it provides a filtered table, which is this table right here, and filters the sum function to just the values we want. Now let's copy this. Control-C, escape. Double-click the second column. We'll call this RTM for month, and enter. Up in the formula bar, Control V, and I want to backspace, backspace. Now we're back to the filter expression, and there is only one filter expression inside a filter. So if we want to run an AND logical test, over in M code we used lowercase and. Here we use ampersand, ampersand. That tells the filter now it's going to have a second condition. And the second condition is the same column. Watch this. I can just click here. That puts it in instead of typing it. And I need the lower limit now, so I say greater than. And guess what? Just like in our SUMIFS formula in the Excel worksheet, I'm going to use end of the month. Now the start date, I need to get to the outside table. So E earlier. Now I can click on this column here just to put it in quickly. And because it's in earlier, now it's not getting the full column from the filter table. It's getting row by row dates from the date column. Close parenthesis on earlier, comma, and I need to jump back to the last day in the previous month. So -1, that gives me the end of the month, last month. Close parentheses. Now we have 1, 2 logical tests on the same date column using ampersand, ampersand. I close parentheses on filter. Filter argument of calculate. Now filter will deliver a full table that meets both conditions, and calculate will filter the table, and the units will be correct. Close parentheses and enter. Now look at that. Now we have running total starting over when we get to April, running total when we get to January in 2020. Now look at this. We actually used the date column earlier twice. An alternative to doing this is we can run a variable. And if we run a variable before we ever get to the filter function, then we don't have to worry about this iterating and jumping back. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to copy this, Control-C, escape. We're going to call this RT month var. And I'm going to define a variable var. And we can see it in green, so it is a legitimate element we can put into the formula. Then we type the name we want. That's the name of the variable. Then I type equals. And watch this. I'm just going to highlight the whole column. That means as it copies down, this variable is calculated as if it was sitting in the row, automatically getting the row context from the row by row iteration. Now I type a space, and I have to type return. And then whatever comes after is the formula. Control V. So I deleted most of that. We have our calculate, our sum. We need to filter using calculate that table to get the correct running total. So we're going to filter this table. I'm going to select that column right there. And I'm going to say, hey, column, greater than or equal to the lower limit, end of the month, MON. And look at this. In Excel Power Pivot Data Model, DAX, XY means that's a legitimate variable that I can hit Tab and use in my formula. Comma, -1, that jumps back and will be our lower limit. I better not have the equal sign because that's the last day from the previous month. And ampersand, ampersand, space. There's the date column, but it's working on that date column there. You also have to be less than or equal to MON. That would be whatever the row date is. Tab. And so for filter, I close parentheses. For calculate, close parentheses, and enter. Now, if we compare these two, I kind of like using the earlier. But some of the advantages that you might gain with a variable, well, it only has to calculate once at the very beginning. Then that static value is used twice. So there might be some performance advantage. Also, some people like the look of using a variable. And so that's a second way to create running total by month. Now, wait a second. This is in the data model. And really, this is just an exercise of how to do running totals in the data model in a calculated column, as Gert asked. This isn't something we can easily load to the Excel sheet. I'm going to save this, Control-S. When I Control-S, those columns actually got saved to the data model in the columnar database. Now I'm going to close this. And just for kicks, I want to bring this out here. In essence, I want to show you how to do a DAX query to look into the data model and pull something out. Now in Excel, this is not real obvious how to do this. And there are a few different ways we could do this. The way I like to do it is I go to Data, Get and Transform, Existing Connections. And our query, which got loaded to the data model, there it is right there. So I click and click Open. Look at that. This is the same import dialog box as we get when we load something using Power Query. I want it as a table in the existing cell. Click OK. And now there you go. We have our running totals and running total by month using DAX. Now to recap, in Excel, we created our expandable ranges using columns and cell references. In Power Query, we created our expandable ranges and running totals using Table.AddColumns and Table.SelectRows and 2 custom functions. And then in DAX, we got to see it 2 different ways. Calculate sum, filter, earlier and end of month. And then we saw a second way in DAX using a variable. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up. Leave a comment and subscribe, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun. All right, we'll see you next video.